Okay, hi everyone. My name is Dr. Rafael Schacter. I am the course convener for ANTH 001 and ANTH 002, that's Introduction to Material and Visual Culture. So I want to say welcome to all of the different students first on the course. Okay, so what is Material Culture Studies? So what is this course we're doing? What is the key ideas present within the subsection and of the department? Okay, so what is material culture studies? So first, a quote from Emil Durkheim. So it is not true that society is made up only of individuals. It also includes material things which play an essential role in common life. So the social fact is sometimes so far materialized as to become an element of the external world. In houses and buildings of all sorts, which once constructed, become autonomous realities, independent of individuals. Social life, which is thus crystallized, as it were, and fixed on material support, is just so much externalized and acts upon us from without. Durkheim 51. So what is that saying? That's talking about the fact that the social world is not simply made up of purely human-to-human interactions and sociality. You know, we can understand politics, religion, we can understand kinship, but understanding these things without the essential material physical artifacts that coalesce and embed amongst these things within those relationships. Without understanding that, we're simply not able to understand social life. So here, these material supports, these artifacts, these things act upon us from without. They become autonomous realities. So the material world here is not simply something mundane. It's not simply something reflecting things which we could understand by other means. These things are crucial to the way social life emerges. So from Danny Miller, much more succinctly, to understand people, we need to understand things and the dialectics of our relationship with them. So here, we cannot understand the way that people work, what people do, who people are, without understanding the relationship to the material world that each one of us has. Finally, Lupton, 1998. So we emotionally charge objects that we wear, that enclose us, our houses or cars, with which we have an embodied interaction on a daily basis, such as furniture, or which have acquired meaning which links us with others, for example, postcards and greeting cards. So the objects that are around us become something which much more than a mundane, basic meaning. We don't simply use them to get around. We use them to understand who we are, to understand who the society that we are part of. Okay, so material culture studies. So this is from a new text that we're writing in the department. About the history of the department. So material culture studies is the empirical study of the material and digital world, or how people make, exchange, and consume objects around the world. So how we make things, exchange things, and consume things. So it's this process of relationships that we have with the material world. The way it's not simply using things, it's making things. It's exchanging them, it's consuming them, it's circulating them, it's destroying them. It's looking at this particular relationship with the things that we have around us that is key to material culture studies. So the associated researchers within the material culture subsection of UCL explore the central role of the material world in human constitution and sociality. So the way that we have social relationships with others, the way that we are constituted as humans ourselves, having a central space within it, which is formed by the material environment. So drawing on long-term fieldwork, which we will undertake, and through a creative ethnographic engagement, UCL Anthropology has become a world-leading centre for the studies of material culture, probably the leading centre. So material culture, the contemporary study of material culture, is an investigation of the relationship between people and things, irrespective of time, past or present, and space, global or local, including the mediation between the two. So the potential range of disciplines involved within material culture studies is effectively as wide as the human and cultural sciences themselves. And that's why we have such a huge breadth of different specialities within the subsection. The common focus, however, of this interdisciplinary research, and we are a very undisciplined discipline. So, as I mentioned earlier, my PhD within the department had both art history and architectural history at its center, alongside with anthropological theory and, of course, anthropological methods. So the common focus of this interdisciplinary research is on the ways that in which artifacts are implicated in the construction, maintenance, and transformation of social identities. So the way we understand ourselves, each other, our societies, emerging through the way we understand, utilize, construct, maintain, and transform artifacts in themselves. Okay, so how can we see this emerging? Well, of course, we're going to see this emerging through the course as we continue, but in something such as fashion, for example. So looking at clothing as a system of communication, as a system of expression, looking at the material qualities of cloth, cloth as memory, looking at its sensory qualities, looking at the relationship between individual versus social identity. So here we can look at both subcultures and mainstream cultures, seeing clothing not simply as a semiotic reflection of a deep, fixed inner state, something you can translate into words, but being dress and dressing, the practice of dressing, which produces this subjective sense of being. So understanding clothes and fashion through a very multifaceted way. Again, not simply something as mundane, but something that, even though seen as to be literally superficial on the surface, can tell us so much about the individual and their social environments. Looking at shopping, again, this is a depiction of my standard weekly shop. Thinking about the way that shoppers develop and imagine the social relationships important to them in the act of shopping through the medium of selecting goods. So Danny Miller talks about the importance of love that is so crucial to the weekly mundane shop. Thinking about purchasing goods relating and linking to social relationships, and also exploring how the consumption of goods and commodities is not simply something passive. This is something quite central to the kind of history of material culture studies. Not seeing consumption as a passive act, often a negative act, but seeing as consumption as a tool used to create social and cultural meanings, as a tool from which to understand ourselves through the act of consumption. We can look at images, both as social objects and looking at their material dimensions, looking at the social lives of images, looking at the production, consumption, circulation, and destruction of images. And also, of course, really thinking about the importance of the digital image, the way that our images and image making has been entirely transformed over just the last decade. We can look at architecture. Here we're going to see two prime examples of architectural forms from London that create entirely different forms of social relationships, both in their very construction and materiality in themselves. We can look at architecture as argument, as embodiment, as metaphor. We can look at architecture as control, as power, as a form of utopia. So a whole different way of seeing the architectural environments that we are embedded in as a way of not just reflecting social forms, but actually creating those social forms. So how does a public space create certain forms of sociality? How does surveillance create certain forms of power within our physical environments? And also what's a very important way as well for material culture studies is thinking about other ways of telling. So we have objects of communication, so we need to think about communicating about objects. So as Chris Tilley said in 2002, we cannot adequately capture or express the power of things in texts alone. This is why experimentation with other ways of telling, in particular with exploiting media which can more adequately convey the synesthetic qualities of things, in particular the use of imagery and film, must become of increasing importance to the study of material forms in the future. So thinking about the way that we are looking at objects, we're looking at the material world, so sound, images, film, how do we find ways of expressing and exploring those topics, those things, those materials in ways other simply than text? So this is an image from an exhibition that I curated in Russia in 2016. This is from some works by the artist Jonathan Hollingworth from his book Left Behind, which you can see here. And these are images of objects that were on John and Jane Doe's, people found between the Mexican and American border who were trying to cross into the US, and these, and unfortunately, died on those journeys. And these were the objects that were left in those pockets, in their pockets. So Jonathan did a project where he was trying to visualize and understand who these people were just from the objects they were carrying. So how do we try to explore that in ways that simply aren't writing about them, but they're utilizing material environments and images in order to convey and understand those ideas, those facts? Equally, this is a work by the artist Cian Dairit that I work with in my project in the Philippines, an artist based in Manila, called Northern Conquests in Oriental Soil and Sea. So this is a tapestry that he produced both in Manila and London for an exhibition held here in London last year, which I curated. Okay, so what's important about this map? So this is from the artwork text that I wrote for the exhibition last year. So Dairit's map aims to literally upturn our traditional perception of geographic space. So based upon a work from 1744 by Emmanuel Bowen, so an English map maker working within this era of colonization, Dairit's Northern Conquest not only physically reverses the original work through rotating the northern and southern axes, but replaces the colonial names in the original map with the collective names of local indigenous groups. So as such, Dairit rejects the naturalized efficiency of colonial cartography and reveals a defiant minor narrative working against the historical grain. So we have the original image here of the map, which Dairit has reversed, and north is now south, east is now west. So he's reversed the orientation of the map. But equally, the names on the map, rather than their colonial names, these are their indigenous names. So immediately he's taken a form of power and form of image making, which is a form of construction of an environment that it controls and affects the way we understand our environments. And of course, map making was a key form and a kind of weapon within the kind of colonial arsenal. So he takes that and he reverses it and he changes the way we can see and then think about those spaces. Equally though, the power of Dairit's counter cartography not only emerges in its infographic status, so the ability to function as a visual form depicting space, memory and time, but so too through its anachronistic positionality. So as I mentioned earlier, whilst the main form of the tapestry was embroidered in Manila, final elements were completed at Hand and Lock, which is the oldest embroiderers in the UK, and who are the official embroiderers of the royal family and the Royal Armed Forces. So what was key here, as I continue, was the fact that imperial and colonial history don't only exist representationally within Dairit's map, but are woven into the fabric of the tapestry. So this material form itself can start to construct, not only tell us things, but construct things. So the importance of images like this is not simply that I'm narrating and I'm talking about my interlocutors themselves, but seeing how our interlocutors are doing that in themselves. So this is Cian talking about complex ideas through material form. So this material form is doing something, it's saying something, and it's enacting something, both in its very artifactual form itself. Okay. So material culture studies. So we study the material world in parallel with the social and cultural world. So social anthropology is a key kind of discipline, of course, of anthropology that we intersect with and that we work with. But we're studying in parallel with the social and cultural world. So we look at the stuff people make, from making artifacts to making our environment, in order to understand the messy relationship between subjects and objects, between individuals and artifacts, to understand how both people make things and things make people. This is what material culture studies is about. It's about understanding the way that people make things and that things make people, and the particular relationship between those two aspects.